Good morning and welcome everyone. It's my joy to be here visiting. My name is Nayaswami Devarshi. I live and serve Ananda's work in India, and I traveled on the way here through New Zealand, where we also have some of our great people who are going to come visit here soon, on my way now to Ananda Village. And it's always such a joy to be here with my Guru Bhais in Ananda, Palo Alto. There's so much light and joy here. Yesterday we had a day of just meditation. We had a 3-hour meditation. We shared satsang and discussion on the path of Kriya Yoga. And today the topic is reason versus intuition. And this touches on many different this versus that issues within spirituality and religion. Seems like there's a lot of conflict within religion, if you haven't noticed. It's reason versus intuition. It's religion versus spirituality, scriptural understanding versus true inspiration and soul knowledge. And this reading today touches on all of these. And I'm going to start by talking about religion versus spirituality, which is another way that Swami Kriyananda picked it up in a beautiful book I would really highly recommend that he wrote called Religion in the New Age. And in there's a chapter on religion versus spirituality, because we see religion tries to attract adherence and attention to itself, as the reading showed, trying to build up the church rather than the individual soul realization. I think as long as the church holds on to its edifices and its power, then it's not good for business for souls to merge back into God, because then they lose those souls as they merge back into God. And so religion versus spirituality. This is universal to all religion. I'll share a story that happened to me not too long ago in India, but it's happened to me everywhere in the world. It just happens that I've spent the last 10 years in India, so my most recent encounter with this concept was there. But this just shows that it's universal. I was in the town of Kurukshetra in India, which is not too far from where I live. It's a very traditional town of Hinduism, where the great battle of Kurukshetra in the Mahabharata occurred and happened. And I was with a friend. He was a Kriya Yogi. I'd never met him before, but we became friends. He was showing us around the town and taking us to some of the holy places. And he, at a certain point, asked me a very serious question. He said, "I need to talk to you about something, that my father is upset with me." And he said, once I started meditating and once I started seeing what I see in my religion, I stopped going with my father to the temples and doing all the rituals and doing the things that are part of the religion. Because, he said, I noticed that many of the people who do that, they do the rituals, they come home, and they're not really improved by it. In fact, many of these people are very greedy and unkind and this and that. And he said, my father's upset that I'm not going with him anymore. And he asked me, is this right? And the man had a lot of love and respect for his religion. In fact, he took us to an ancient temple there and had a ritual done for us with the priest. So there was love and respect there. But he said that his own religion had become helping others and serving others and also practicing meditation. He was a very spiritually refined man. During the day, we met a young girl who needed his help, and he said he had 40 children who were these children from extremely disadvantaged families and homes, impoverished, who he was supporting their schooling and even sending them to college. And he said he saw that people who practiced the religion were not so kind and expansive in that way. And we see this everywhere. We see this every religion. I was brought up in the religion that used to have this church, the Catholic Church, and I saw the same. I've heard the same in Italy. And this is why many people are leaving religions. I've shared this many times. It's in a book that I wrote on Kriya Yoga, where a comedian once said, years ago, and it's still happening, he said thousands and thousands of people, studies are showing, are leaving the churches and going back to God. And This is religion versus spirituality. One time Swami Kriyananda was talking to a young man who he met at a coffee shop or some such place. And, Swamiji was introducing himself and describing who he was, what he did. And the man looked at Swamiji and he said, "Well, I'm afraid I'm not very religious." And Swamiji replied quietly, "I'm not either, actually." And what he meant is that the purpose of religion, of scriptures, of all these things is to take us back into the realization of God. They're vehicles, they're important vehicles. And so we have to understand it's not always a complete conflict. It's not always one or the other. It can be both. And this example of reason versus intuition, Yogananda's own guru, Sri Yukteswar, he said that saintliness is not dumbness, and that you have to use your common sense and you have to use your intelligence, but you can't depend on it. Because when you start depending on the outer form, then you start getting bogged down in, again, ritual, the confusion of the scriptures, the confusion of all these different religions, what they teach, what Yogananda called churchianity. Yogananda said he came, just like all the great reformers of religion came, to give people the direct experience of God. And he bemoaned what he called churchianity, which was trying to bring people just to the churches. And it was only when I came onto this path of Kriya Yoga, following these great masters, that I really developed a great appreciation for the Catholic Church and the great saints that have come out of it, almost having to fight their way out of it in certain ways, the stories that we read. And so this is why one of the sort of the most humorous statements in Yogananda's autobiography of a yogi is he's quoting Adi Shankara, another great reformer of religion who came to reform Hinduism at that time. And Adi Shankara said that religious, ritual, and spiritual ignorance are not mutually contradictory. And so we have to understand that the purpose of all these things is to carry us to that divine freedom, that inner realization. And it's the same with outer form. These things are important as a doorway to help us reach there. But again, I'll tell another story of a great Indian saint. And this starts to touch on outer worship and inner realization and how the two of them work together. The saint's name is Ram Prasad. We've heard stories of him, I think many of us. He was a great Bengali poet and singer, and he wrote many beautiful poems and songs. And we sing one of them here as one of our chants. And many of his other poems show his unique relationship with God as the Divine Mother. And he had a very unusual relationship with the Divine Mother. It was very teasing at times. It was very scolding at times. You see this in his poetry. I'd recommend reading some of his other poems because he did not hold back from sort of yelling at Divine Mother for creating this mess, this delusion that we're in and tricking us so often. And so she also had a very teasing relationship with him. And the story, this incident in his life shows this. And one day he was going early in the morning, going to the river Ganga where he worshipped, and he was going to do his morning rituals, which was part of his religious upbringing. And he was likely going to even chant some of the very mantras that we chanted this morning before the service. And on the way to the river, he was going through some people, and he saw this very magnetic young woman and girl who was beckoning him to stop and talk. And he went inside and said, no, I have to go do my rituals. And so he went to the river Ganga, and he started to do his rituals. And then the light bulb went off in his head, and he realized, oh my God, that was Divine Mother herself trying to stop me. And what an idiot. I came here and I said, no, I can't talk to you. I have to do my rituals. And so he stopped his rituals. He went back. He went to look for her, called for her, and she wasn't there. And he prayed, and he said, please forgive me for being such an idiot. And then he heard her voice talking to him, and he prayed, was that really you, Divine Mother? Because she would tease him, and he was never sure. And then he heard a voice speaking in his mind, and the voice said, yes, I am Annapurna, and I am in Kashi. And Annapurna is one of the many forms of Divine Mother. And her most famous and sacred ancient temple where she lives is in Kashi in India, which is also known as Varanasi. And so Ramprasad realized, okay, I have to go to Kashi. And here she was teasing him all along, and even more, as you'll see. So I have to go to Kashi. So he immediately gathered his belongings, started the many, many days trek to go to Varanasi to go see Divine Mother as Annapurna. And about 2 days into the journey, he was meditating and praying by the river late at night, praying to her. And she appeared to him in vision, her full form in vision. And she said to him, "Where are you going? What are you doing?" And he said, "I'm going to Kashi. What do you think? Where do you think I'm going?" And she said, "But I'm omnipresent. I'm everywhere. You don't have to go to Kashi." And so he didn't. He had the experience, and he saw her as he was wanting to, and he went back. And in a way, this is how God teases us with religion, with scriptures. And yeah, we have these beautiful scriptures, and yet Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita says, yes, they can be really confusing too. And yet they do guide us. We read from them here every Sunday, and we use them to guide our wisdom and understanding. And so it's not one or the other, but too often we tend to err on the side of the outward form. And yet, here was Ramprasad. Swami Kriyananda once said that when we go on spiritual pilgrimage and we see the form of the deity, as we do very often in temples in India, he said it's good, go and worship, go and pray, but see that form as a window to the infinite. And then after worshiping the Divine Mother or the deity in that form, go and sit and meditate. And many of us have done this when we go on pilgrimage. And so Ramprasad, that's what he did. He had to actually take that step. In a way, I think, if he hadn't started putting out the willpower, which is what he was doing, to go to Kashi to see the Divine Mother, if he had just stayed passively at home and just waited for something to happen, maybe she would not have appeared to him, but he had to put out some energy and say, okay, I need to go see you. And he started going, and then she appeared to him. And so our part, yes, we come here on Sundays, we worship, we go to the altar, we pray, we listen to scripture, but use these things as a vehicle, as a doorway to the infinite, to take us to that divine inner freedom. But in the end, it's about the experience of God. I wrote a book that many of you maybe have read. It's called Kriya Yoga, Spiritual Awakening for the New Age. And it's a spiritual practice for the New Age too. And this too, people can get caught up in the techniques as the be-all and end-all. And again, they are important. And I've spent most of my last 40 years teaching the practices and the techniques. But too often people also get bogged down in the outer practice and the mechanical practice of them. And so we also have to use them as a vehicle to carry us to this divine inner freedom, really. And this is the spiritual practices too. When we come for classes here, those of you who have attended classes on meditation and Kriya Yoga, learn to use these practices because they are necessary to teach us how to start to interiorize. And this is why Yogananda said, I've come to give you the direct experience of God in deep meditation. And he said he brought Kriya Yoga and these techniques to give us the direct experience of God and show us how to reach there. Autobiography of a Yogi. And I start the Kriya Yoga book almost in the introduction with this passage from Autobiography of a Yogi, where the young Yogananda, Mukunda, as he was called, is visiting a saint, the levitating saint, Bhaduri Mahashaya. And they meditate together for an hour or two. And at the end of the meditation, this wise sage gently chides the young Mukunda. And he says to him, you often go into the silence, the stillness of meditation, but have you developed anubhav, which is the direct experience of God? And he said, don't mistake the techniques for the goal. And so don't mistake the techniques, the rituals, the sitting in church, the listening to discourses. Don't mistake that for the goal. But they are a really essential and important guide to show us how to reach the goal. And with the techniques of meditation and Kriya Yoga, they're very, very powerful tools for taking us to having that direct experience of God. One of the great joys for me of being in a church that's the same, not the exact same place, but the same religion that I was brought up in was yesterday, again, we meditated for 3 hours, practicing meditation, Kriya Yoga, God contact, devotional chanting. And I think everyone was very, very uplifted, because when souls come together with that divine yearning and that aspiration, there's a great power, and the divine hears that call when souls come together like that and says, yes, I hear you, I'm coming, and enters into our hearts. And I think many of us, all of us, had some anubhav yesterday morning, some perception or experience of God. And the techniques that we practice too often, and I work with people who practice meditation, and this applies to Kriya Yoga or any other spiritual practice that we do. I work with many over the years, and I do see that this old religion way of being caught up in the form, that we can carry that into even our meditation practice. And it's in a way, it's a bit like, I've seen this before, where I've gone to the ocean many times, and I saw once in the parking lot, there was a car, and there was these people sitting in the car. I think they were young people. They had the stereo cranked up, air conditioning on, looking out the window at the ocean. And they never got out of the car. And we think, man, these people are pretty dumb. But, well, let's introspect a little bit and turn the finger around on ourselves. And that's what we do when we sit down for an hour of meditation, and we only practice techniques, and we never get out of the car and actually immerse ourselves and have that experience of God. And so learn these practices, learn the scriptures, but it's all about tasting and experiencing this. Ramakrishna, the way he put it, this great Indian sage and saint and master, he said that just reading scriptures and hearing talks and learning about God is like reading for years books about an orange and the color of the orange and how to grow the orange and the different flavor elements of the orange without ever actually tasting the orange. And the purpose of all this is to take us to that place of calmness, of spiritual depth, of being beyond emotional agitation and actually tasting that orange. And now coming back to intuition versus reason, Yogananda, he defined intuition as calm feeling. And I would add calm feeling perception, because we're perceiving with the heart in a way. And that's how we really experience God. It's not with the head, it's not with the thoughts, it's with feeling perception. In his autobiography of a yogi, Yogananda talked about an experience of God as cosmic consciousness, and he wrote that poem, Samadhi, that many are familiar with. And he, in describing that experience that he had of cosmic consciousness, he said, I perceived the Empyrean, the cosmos, from a point of intuitive perception in my heart. And this feeling perception, it's, someone was asking me yesterday, they took a class on how to learn intuition, and asked me, can you just give a class and teach someone how to have intuition? And the answer was sort of a yes and no. No in the sense that when Swami Kriyananda talked about Kriya Yoga, not just as a technique, but as a whole intuitive approach and understanding, he said that the most important part of Kriya Yoga I cannot teach you. And when I heard this, I thought, oh no, I've come all this way, and now he's telling me he can't teach me this. And he alluded to really what he was talking about, which is that these practices, religion, he said it's art as well as science. And you can teach the techniques of art to students at art colleges, but very few come out of that art college as really brilliant artists, even though they know the techniques. And you have a lot of bad artists that come out of art college. But the ones who really understand and become great inspired artists, they are working from this feeling level of intuitive awareness, of inspiration, which is a feeling of the heart. It's an uplifted feeling of the heart. And so the tools of meditation that we learn, they're designed not to kill the emotions and the negative, the fears and the worries. They're designed to calm the agitated feelings of the heart. This is the definition of yoga according to the great sage Patanjali. Yoga is the calming and neutralizing of the agitated feeling. And then learning to interiorize and redirect that calm, divinely awakened, inspired feeling and directing it upwards towards the divine. And so when we do that, the techniques help us to do that. But then we get out of the vehicle and we start tasting that orange. People ask the question sometimes with techniques, because again, this is a seeming conflict, techniques versus devotion and inspiration. But again, it's not one or the other, it's really both and. And people ask me, and again, this applies to all traditions, all practices. They'll ask me when I'm practicing Kriya Yoga and I start having an experience of inspiration, should I forget the technique and go into that, or should I stay with the technique? The way that Yogananda put it, he said that when you have an experience of ecstasy while doing techniques, you're done with the techniques. But sometimes people just have a little bit of a glimmer of some nice feeling, and they think, okay, time to get out. But experiment with this. Those who practice any techniques of any tradition, try both ways. When you have a glimmer only of inspiration, start practicing the technique with that inspiration. And you'll find that it's actually a merger or a marriage of technique and feeling that has extraordinary power. And yes, if it's a deep, uplifted experience of God, step out of the boat and have that deep experience of actually tasting the orange. And so this is where reason is required, common sense is required to do what we need to do, to learn, even to learn the techniques. Yogananda said that stupid people cannot learn the techniques and the practices of meditation. And he wasn't being insulting. He was, talking about us when we're stupid and we're just ignoring reason and pretending that we're above all of that and just wanting to work from inspiration. And so this whole combination of reason and intuition, I really love this, our Palo Alto Sangha, because in many ways, from what I've seen, this is in Silicon Valley in the highest way, when it's really enlightened, is really the great merger and combination of enlightened reason and enlightened intuition and inspiration. Because even any great new idea cannot come from reason alone. Einstein talked about this. He said, new things cannot come just from reason. And he actually called it intuition. He said, new knowledge requires intuition. And in our own spiritual lives, new knowledge, new understanding, spiritual growth requires intuition. And I would recommend learning more about intuition and what Yogananda talked about it as calm feeling. And really, again, it can't be taught with little check boxes and that kind of thing. It has to be practiced. It has to be experienced. Yogananda, finally I'll end by saying that when he was asked how the best way to develop intuition, this calm feeling awareness, he said also that this is how we know God, is through intuition. He said the best way to develop it was the time in meditation after we finished techniques and we're sitting and practicing what we would call deep inner communion with some aspect of the divine, as spirit, as light, as bliss, as one of the forms of God, but more as the window into that eternal power of the divine. And so take this understanding with the head and take it into the heart. Take it into the heart of our own meditation practice and start to consciously develop and improve, as we're all working on it all the time, improve that intuitive awareness and perception and understanding. I'll finish by reading what the Bhagavad Gita passage that we heard just now, because it really distills it. When your intellect, at present confused by the diversity of teaching in the scriptures, becomes steadfast in the ecstasy of deep meditation, then you will achieve final union with God. And so I pray that we all learn how to do this better and better, and learn how to open our hearts to receive that touch of grace and that touch of light, which we will now do through our festival of light.
Let's take a brief moment of silence now. We'll have some music. He who would slake his thirst now and forever, let him not fill his cup here from this well. From living waters, saved in the silence, in spirit and in truth, break ego's spell.